Welcome everyone to the Digital Academy, and we're going to do things a little differently in this session. So the idea was I wanted to do a kind of a full walkthrough of how I go about conceptualizing my ideas, coming up with certain pieces of concept art, key art, illustrations, sketches, some layouts, and really just showing how the organic process behind developing my work. Now, the process applies to both personal and commercial work, but of course, I will have some time constraints with the commercial work as opposed to my personal projects. This one is a personal project for the Academy itself, so I have a nice little mix here of taking my time with it, but also setting a deadline, setting an objective for me. One of the first things that we should always try to do before coming into conceptualizing scenes, key art, layouts, just trying to get an idea, a sense of what the framing of a piece of your story might look like, especially when you're doing the visual storytelling. This is getting reference. Now, there are some artists, there are some people, some groups that might treat reference in a very hands-off kind of way. They don't believe in getting reference. They believe it's copying to some extent. I'm not going to challenge anyone's beliefs around that. I would advise, however, that reference is used so that you get a sense of where you're headed, at least subconsciously. So even if you don't save any of those pictures that you look up on Google, online, or even if you have some kind of image resource that you're looking through, the idea is not to take the images and just translate it one-to-one into your workspace. The idea is so that your mind, your brain can understand the direction that you want to head in, all right, to kind of have a subconscious learning sequence to go on as you scrub through the reference images in your library, all right, whether it be online, locally on your machine, on your phone, in a magazine, whatever the case might be. And once you have the reference, what you're trying to look at is what are the key components of the scenes, especially if you're looking for something very specific, like I did for like a cliffside outdoor sunset or sunrise type scenario. Now, I might not have found something specific to the scene I am building. The idea with the reference is to understand that if I'm going to create a scene that looks like this or feels like this, what ideally is supposed to be present in the scene from a light perspective, the color, any of the organic materials, even the inorganic materials. So in this case, we have like an RV kind of something. I call it a crawler. We have a RV research vehicle, not too far off in the shot, but that's not only the focus. That's not the only subject in the scene. So getting reference for these objects, for these items, getting reference for even the characters or the creatures that you might want to use in your scene is good. And looking at them, spending some time with it would allow for you to approach or to tackle the concept pieces with a little more confidence. Why is that important in all of this? Well, a lack of confidence in your work shows, ultimately. I mean, if you're approaching something like you're not sure, it's going to show up in the final product, it's going to show up in your process, it's going to show up in your decision making. And reference is your way of becoming more acquainted with the elements that will allow you to tackle multiple iterations, essentially, because you understand the core components of what the scene, what the subject is supposed to look like, especially when the lighting and the framing is meant to capture and embody a particular message or emotion. Let's try to convey a particular feeling. All right. So reference plays a big part in it. Reference, without reference, you are more or less going to be free-forming and free-falling through the process, which works. I mean, you can get really fortunate in that creative process of hitting some gems, arriving at some comfortable final pieces, some final products. But from a practice standpoint, in terms of what your customary pipeline should look like, is that from the very start, you make the attempt to familiarize yourself with what you're attempting to replicate, to create, to modify. All right? And once you have reference in hand, the next step, the objective here now, would be to start blocking the scene out or drafting the layout of the entire piece using your organic lines. Now, the organic lines would allow for a faster rendering process. Rendering in this case being the hand-rendered drawing, a hand-rendered sketch. But using the organic lines really allows you to move through the scene with a little more ease, because you're not spending all of your time focusing on any one object, trying to detail it too much. You're really just trying to gesture your way through the entire piece. You're trying to indicate using organic lines, organic shapes, organic forms, using some simple cross-hatching, some light shading to indicate what the future steps or where the future steps will take you. So it means that you will see where the majority of the details might have to be, depending on how close something is to the camera, how far away it is, the orientation of that object in terms of what part of the object is facing the camera, and how much detail we might have to show. The lighting is something that we would have to pay a lot of consideration to, provided that without light, rather because of light, we can see everything, and without light, we can see nothing. So all the colors, the mood, the tone, the ambience is all set by the lighting. You have the freedom to, at the line stage, to put things in place, to put objects, to stage people, just to stage the environment, whether it be trees, buildings, cars. In this case, we're dealing with an outdoor environment, so a lot of wildlife, dealing with a cliffside environment. We have the opportunity to just lay objects down, so we're kind of blocking it out. We're staging the scene at the same time. We're kind of setting up, we're kind of framing composition on the fly. And the light is what will inform the color, not necessarily the objects in the scene. So the draft line really allows you to explore the ideas at an early stage. You're able to kind of establish, okay, this is the environment. I want to kind of have the environment down on one set of layers, whether it be a floor as one layer, trees in another layer, shrubbery, stones, or you do foreground, midground, background. You just have your core base environment locked in. Once the core environment is locked in, once you have that blueprint down, you're able to outfit or furnish that scene with all of the other inanimate objects, with all of the man-made objects, or the other organic objects that might be, whether it be passing through the scene, static in the shot, whether it be characters, creatures, animals. You get the picture, and you just category group them accordingly. Once you have your layers grouped, it would be easy to switch them on and off, drop the opacity and play with the colors, play with some lighting, move them around. It's a lot easier than if it's done all on one or two layers. So utilize the layers inside of your sketching and painting software, and just try to organize the work in such a way that you could find these sections, find these groups a lot easier. Now, when you begin putting down the line art, you might be tempted to over detail certain elements, certain objects in the scene early in the game, purely because you started the process, you like how it's looking, how it's feeling, and you want to run with it. But the idea with this is that you want to test, you want to put enough detail that you can test things like scale, distance, the way that the lines might interact with one another, the relationship between the different shapes, if things look too blocky, too curved, it doesn't suit the entire environment. You have to assess the scene from on a very at a very detailed level. All right, you have to look at the entire thing as a silhouette to see if the design language is coherent and flowing. Okay, and by that we just mean that it doesn't look like you took two different styles, two different types of geometry, or 2, 3, 4 different types of visual representations and sort of cram them into one space. All right, it's making sure that all of it looks like believable in one space, all right, in that world. And that's super important to remember in all of this, because we are developing these images for story. We have to keep in mind that it has to make sense for the world. So, keeping the world and the law in mind is super important, especially where scale and how things are represented. So once we have this particular version of our piece down, of our conceptual art down, of our illustration for some, we have an idea as to where we're headed with the overall line art. Now, what this does not tell us, it does not give us light information. As I said, it does not give us color information. It does not give us movement, anything like that. It doesn't give us anything beyond the environment, the framing of the shot, the distance of the crawler, or the RV in this case, from the camera. All right, we have a seating area that the characters that will be drawn will come in. And from there, then we decide how to outfit or how to furnish, or how to finish the entire shot. All right. When doing vehicles, when drawing crafts, vehicles, ships, planes, jets, fighters, any combination or any of the above, it'll be a good idea to use reference, simply because if you're aiming for believability or realism, you use reference. If you're freeforming it, if you're going something purely out of your head, that's fine. But understand that in the craft or vehicle creation process, especially mechanical designs, it's going to be a process of firstly coming up with the idea, yes, but then beyond this, you're going to need more information when dealing with vehicles and crafts and ships, purely because if you have to reuse this vehicle in another shot at a different angle, you're going to definitely need kind of like a turnaround sheet, a character sheet, a blueprint sheet for that vehicle. All right, so that would help you to kind of replicate the design again, identical to what you might have done in this particular piece, in this particular version, this iteration. But if you are just kind of freeballing it, and you are testing, you're just kind of looking through or running through the ideas, you're kind of crafting it as you go, that's also an option. I like to always advise that if you intend on using vehicles, you intend on using any kind of craft, any kind of transport, any mode of transport, that you have a sheet, almost like the equivalent of a character sheet for those vehicles. It's so that you can have a clear understanding of how the vehicle is supposed to be made up, built, move, all the components, the colors, all the different sections where everything is. And you have to understand that it might seem tedious at first, but you're going to thank yourself, your future self is going to thank you for putting this particular work up, putting this kind of work in from now. And of course, for studios across the various industries in film, game design, toy design, you need almost like a blueprint for these vehicles, so you can get 3D models done, so that you can get it implemented into games, and of course for CGI for film. But even for something as simple as illustration or conceptual art, it is good to have for your vehicle designs, it's good to have in your portfolio a full turnaround or full breakdown of the different components of those vehicles. Thankfully and sadly, we are not at this stage with this particular vehicle yet, but I will be sure to update a production video with a second version of the RV with a full breakdown sheet. So we're going to do a full vehicle breakdown, a concept piece, once this particular concept art is in fact complete. So I'm just going to be working through the entire vehicle, just trying to get a nice solid outline, just to get some division for the sections set up. Once that's in place, I can take it from there. I love vehicle design purely because, one, it's a little more straightforward in terms of the way that you can design the parts, the components. You have a little more flexibility in terms of creativity, using your imagination with modular parts and pieces, with just vehicles, ships, any modes of transport. I mech designs. I love the full works purely because, again, outside of organic materials that already exist in the natural world, that already have a set kind of state of being, they have a set way of existing, they have a set way that they appear, that they look, that we interact with them. When it comes to these designs, it's like we have the opportunity to mold what vehicle transport looks like, all right, as opposed to a human or an animal that we might do concept pieces for. Those things are kind of set. I mean, yes, you could do modified versions of it. You have your own monsters and creatures that will defy those laws, that will defy physics, that will defy anatomy. But ultimately speaking, when it comes to vehicles, you have a lot more freedom, in my opinion, to play with what the final outcome might look like. I mean, from a functional standpoint, you have to be careful that you don't design things that just look great purely for the sake of looking good. But the aim should be that you create with functionality in mind. All right, you aim for it to be, you think about it in a functional sense, as if it were functioning, it's moving, it's fully operational, and you design as if you were the one to use that particular vehicle or craft. It might sound a little weird, it might be difficult for some that may not have the ability to kind of do that in their own head. So when doing your vehicle designs, when you're working with craft, when you're working with ships, have fun, but try to keep it as grounded as you can, because ultimately you want to communicate that sense of believability. You don't want something so absurdly large or absurdly small and so compact that it creates a disconnect with the viewer or the reader of the story. Because any art that you are creating, any piece, any conceptual art like this at least, needs to communicate some information about the world, the story, and do so appropriately. Some context will always come in at some point. Some context will come in handy, and you can provide context, whether it be with a caption, a title, but ultimately the visuals will need to communicate what is going on in that world, at least this one frame. And we will eventually get to a point where, when we begin to introduce color and texture to it, that it begins to demonstrate what is not only the purpose and the functions of the vehicle, but who are the inhabitants or users of the vehicle in this space, in the story. So it's a process. It's something that gets built up over time. It's something that the steps before directly influence and inform what comes next, right? They're not disconnected at all in that type of way. They need one another in order to produce that final piece. Now, once you have things like the landscape down, you have a vehicle, we have just the scene is kind of being set up here. The priming flats, which is that flat kind of salmon color, that pinkish off red flesh tone kind of color. That flat tone below allows me now to kind of establish what is the subject in the entire frame, and using the values within that color, right? Using values, and able to paint some depth into the scene. So the cliffside will be this particular color and intensity, this hue, and then I will lighten it going further and further back into the distance, creating that illusion or creating that sense of depth way off into the horizon or the mountain line. And the purpose behind this is essentially to allow me to start setting up eventually my shadows, because I like working with the light in terms of how the light direction and how that light is going to interact with everything in the scene before I begin to add like base colors and, highlights and these things. I just like to get a sense of how this light is going to operate once I've locked in all of the features, once I've locked in all of the elements, locked in all of the characters, whether it be creatures, and then now I begin to color it. I just need to firstly have my lighting in place. So once I decide my lighting direction, I now would, go in and start applying some shadows in the creases and overlaps of areas that I believe that the light would be here. So if I believe that the light is coming from the horizon line and coming towards the camera at an angle to my right, maybe at a 100-degree angle, all right, so that will be the equivalent of, let's say, on a clock, we're talking maybe 4 or 5 o'clock on the clock in terms of direction. That's the direction of the light. So if the light is coming at a 5 o'clock direction, right, from left to right, it just means that all of the light will be in the majority coming from the left, whether it be bottom left, top left, depending on how much light is captured, how much light the trees might catch, or how much light hits the cliffside. And then anything else that is not blocking the sun is going to be washed over by the light, and anything that is blocking the sun is going to have a shadow. So the aim is to ultimately mimic how that light would behave in real life before I begin to add any real kind of color per se. All right. So we're using our primary flats to get some more flat colors in. Once we can establish what our different sections are in the scene, then we can further progress the establishing the shadow details. So I absolutely love working with prime and flats and gradients, because using those type of flat colors and the gradients really helps me to establish that sense of light in the scene. All right. Now the flat shading is to establish objects in the environment, the creatures, the people, just the entire layout of and the structure of the shot. The gradients in this instance, you can use to establish the lighting. Now, I'm using it for the sky. I'm using a radial gradient for the sky, and you can use a linear gradient on the ground also to get that same drop-off effect of the light, starting from the cliffside, move all the way inwards inland. But using it for the sky, using the gradient automatically, using the radial gradient for the sky, gives me a nice finish for the overall sky look. But if I am going to do a light fall off, which we will eventually see, I do that one manually. I do that one by hand in terms of painting the intense light and then blending the light backwards into the full off zone, right? Where the light won't reach as intense. So once, just to kind of reiterate, once I do have all of my flats, my primary flats in, and I have some of my base colors, I have more or less established the layout of the entire design, I can spend a lot more time now going in and adding the real shadows and establish the lighting setup of the foliage of the trees, of how the lighting will affect the ground and everything else inside the shot. So again, it's a step-by-step process. And each step needs the step before to kind of influence what is going on. And understanding how light works helps you also, and this is where the reference comes in, helps you also to kind of speed up the process of filling in those layers, of getting from line art to flat colors to base colors to your first pass of shadows, and then you have a second pass of shadows, your first pass of light, second pass of light, finer shadow details, finer lighting details, and then you have your lighting effects, and then all in other atmospheric effects like particles, dust, whatever the case might be. So you have to treat it almost like a scientific process if you want to have total control over how these concepts are developed. And I say this because it is super important for one, for not only showing the working behind the work, but two, as a teachable tool that you can show that this process is repeatable because you understand what goes into the final render, the final look, final rendering, right? The final output. So you once you have a clear understanding of a process, you don't just jump in painting things on just a handful of layers purely for the sake of talent and just for showing off. That works in some instances. You will need speed, but when you're talking about applying to even jobs, you need to have a portfolio that you can showcase what your process might be. Because even though your process is your process and you're working with other teams, you might not necessarily use your process specifically in a project to get a job done, but you need to have a clear indication that you have a process and that you do have an understanding of how to bring the concept from idea to final iteration. All right. So take it in strides, take it step by step, and try to think about the building up of the scene in terms of your line art, your flat colors, your priming flats, flat colors, your first pass shadows, second pass shadows, first pass light, second pass light, final shadow details, final lighting details, atmospheric effects. So just repeating that again so that we have a firm grip on what we are to do regardless of the environment. So whether it be external, interior, exterior, whether it be a character alone, a creature. But in this case, when you're doing environmental work, that process absolutely allows you to streamline how you get from A to B. Now, once we bring in the RV, the crawler, you'll notice that in the priming flats, I'm just going straight into kind of like a base camouflage green to kind of blend in with the trees. And that's intentional. The idea behind it is to have it look like one of those invisible vehicles that will reflect the environment or taking the information from behind and just kind of wrapping it around the vehicle. So it's almost like you're seeing through it, but not really. All right. So this is, I think, going to be part one of 3 parts or 2 parts for this video. And in this instance, it's going to be more or less unfinished, but it's going to give a clear indication as to where we are in fact heading with the vehicle design. Hey everyone, and welcome back to part 2, where we continue with the process. So once we've laid out more or less or staged the scene, we've already kind of set the scene in terms of the foreground, midground, background, what are the core elements of the shot. We've set up our composition. And now I want to start adding a little more detail in terms of the shadows, in terms of the terrain itself, adding a little more character to the overall floor design, it's a ground design, because we don't want things to look too smooth in terms of texture. So ultimately, that's what we're doing. We're creating shadows in detail to the more textured areas of the floor design. So when you are creating organic spaces, when you're doing things in the natural environment, the idea is to not have it look too man-made. You're not trying to have things look too processed. Whereas clean metal or metals, plastics, glass, these materials would have their own properties in terms of how they're represented. In nature, in the wild, the way that shadows, lines, curves, edges form and how they appear, they're not only a lot more random, but they are far more organic in appearance. So when you want to create a sense of ruggedness, you want to create a sense of organicness, you want to create a space that has texture, that has a feel to it, you should use the shadows, or the shadow lines at least, to create outlines of the areas that you will eventually develop as more detail. So I did it around the perimeter of the campsite. We've added in some gestures of the characters just for positioning, to get a sense of spacing, scale. We know how they're going to fit in terms of the crawler, not only in terms of distance, but proportion. This gives you an idea of what it's like for one person, what the size of the vehicle looks like next to one person, and then the size of the space that the characters, the vehicle, that they're both in. So it's a multi-part process that you're looking at, and as you add more and more pieces, you figure it out. You find yourself figuring it out more and more and refining each of the areas. Moving on from the shadows and some of the base details, I started adding some lighting details. Now, edge lights or rim light usually works in areas where you want to catch, glimpses of light that will run along the edges of objects, as you're seeing here. But this serves a particular purpose. I'm doing it this way because the vehicle material, or the paint job on it, is like a camouflage. So this is meant to give you just the effect of the light hitting parts of the panels and the edges of the panels catching that light, but the actual flat surface area, the top side and underside, the material is making it appear transparent or reflective. So it's giving it that sort of see-through look, as if you're seeing through the vehicle to the other side. It has a frosted glass. It has a frosted glass appearance. So the edges, I'm creating highlights by setting my brush and layer to linear dodge add, and that is how I'm able to accomplish painting over any colors that I have there, but specifically the green, and create these hot points to represent that the light coming from the left-hand side, moving across to the right, it's catching the light at the back of the crawler a lot more with a greater intensity. All right, so it has a greater effect, and it has a greater effect to the back of the vehicle, right? So you're going to have light, because light is bouncing all around in the scene. Yes, you're going to have light bouncing from the ground upward towards the vehicle. You're going to have light coming from the left to the right, from the top down, because light is not necessarily contained, especially in the open environment, in the open world. It's not contained in the way that artificial lights might be contained in a room or shot through a particular source. Global Illumination global lighting, the light is scattering. It's an omnidirectional light. So the light is moving in every direction, even if it is coming from one global point, right? From one point inward. But the light is scattering everywhere. So yes, there's going to be intensity to the back of the vehicle, but we have to remember that the light, in terms of visibility, it has to make sense and read as if it is affecting not just the vehicle, but the characters and the environment in the same way, in a similar fashion. Now, once I got the hang of setting up the sections, the components on the crawler itself, I started to define the areas with a lot more deliberate detail. So it's not just gesture drawings anymore. It's no longer just implying certain sections. It's not implying the depth with vague shadows. It's now going in with harder, sharper lines and actually creating contrasts between the areas, between the colors, between the sections. And the more time you spend with it, you will be able to add more detail and develop the concept. But you should not just add detail for adding detail's sake. The details, as I mentioned before, it should be added to communicate, to provide some context around what we're looking at, and not just to look pretty. So it should add ultimately to the wider story that the image is being developed for. Especially if you're talking about production or game design, or developing even a book, the image should capture what is going on and provide you with enough information to come back and notice certain things even beyond just the first read or the first look, the first intake of the visual media. So when you're looking at it, create enough detail to maybe indicate how many sections the vehicle might have, how many wheels they may have. If it can fly, is it an amphibious vehicle? What can you put on this to indicate that? Some might put a snorkel to the top, or several snorkels to have the vehicle submerged. Some might put some kind of rocket pack or jet pack or thrusters visibly or to the underside of the vehicle. And so in all of these things, put thought into the design, but don't just jump into detailing the concept off the top of your head. All right? Put thought into what the function and purpose of the vehicle might be. All right? Put some thought into the type of spaces it might have to go into. And this will tell you what you need or how you need to build this particular craft in order to fit into the world and to function inside of this story, for it to make sense. Because yes, you can make visually impressive things, but from a functionality standpoint, the world mechanics, it just doesn't agree. All right? So the scale has to make sense. Even down to the rendering, you final rendering, the colors, the shaders, the materials being used, even the textures that you hand paint, needs to make sense inside of the world. So once you work with layers, once you take your time and section all of your components, so you put your vehicle in one folder and have all of the layers that correspond to that folder grouped. You have your characters in one layer, you have your environment in one layer, in one folder, and then inside of that folder you have your trees, your dirt, your sky, clouds, background, etc. And you section everything off so you can focus on these areas and make the necessary changes and adjustments if you so need it. All right, if you so desire. If you realize that there's a change that is needed, you can go back. There is merit to painting things on with the fewer layers, but again, it's all dependent on the purpose of the piece, the type of project, and the type of team that you're ultimately working with, if at all. So bringing in some of the actual base colors now, the more dynamic colors, the different shades and tones in between, to provide some variability and depth to the scene, and not just have that sort of looming darkness and calling it a shadow. You're now showing the browns of the barks of the trees coming through at different levels, at different intensities, which is suggesting or implying, that it's a thick shrubbery, that it's a thick area, thick brush. So you can't actually see through past a certain point. It gets pretty dark, pretty dense. It's a dense area. That's the word. So it's a pretty dense area of shrubbery, of greenery. And you have to keep all of this in mind when you're painting your shadows. You just can't have the light passing uniformly all through the scene. It's not going to, the light is going to fall off at different points. It's going to get stopped and blocked at different points. The shadows are going to appear differently in some areas than others. And the colors in the shadows, you have to keep that in mind, that shadows aren't just solid black, especially from a digital painting perspective. You should really try to stay away from using totally black shadows in your scenes and in your concept pieces. Look to use shadows with hints or undertones of the colors of the object or the areas that you're painting. So if you're working with trees, use a shadow with a green undertone. If you're working with the earth, use it with a brown undertone. If you're working with the sky and water, use it with a blue undertone. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but it's absolutely going to give you a much nicer result, a much more natural feel than the stylistic hard black shadows. Right, so that's just my take and opinion on that. It's not a rule. You can try it. If it works for you, then hey, that's fine, and I can't challenge that. What I have seen is that when you use black shadows continuously or uniformly all throughout your scene, you can't really create depth in that kind of way, especially if you're not using the levels, you're not using values, you're not using, you're not doing it incrementally in steps. You're just applying a black, flat, dark colors, and just because that's typically how shadows might be represented. But I try to stay away from that purely because I want a lot more control over how the colors are represented, how they show up, and what I can do in post-production, in post-processing when I am adjusting the colors individually. I can isolate the different channels, I can isolate the different colors, and my shadows, I could boost those colors even more in post-processing and introduce some colors rather than just being flat black and not having any color in it at all. So that part could be a little much to try to think about or to consider. But if you apply your shadows with the color of the object in mind, the color of the character, the color of the environment in mind, and you apply some or you mix or you blend some of those colors into the shadow layer, it's going to give your scene a more natural or organic appearance. It's not going to look, if the light and shadow areas are not going to look as forced or as harsh. All right, so you get that nice subtle fall off, especially if you include the nice the added touch of your smudge brush and fading this out in a lot of the areas. I want big piece of advice I want to give artists, young and upcoming artists, aspiring artists, even for the seasoned ones, is we can tend to overthink and over analyze, over process exactly where we want to go with our pieces or what we want to accomplish. Especially if you're trying to build a portfolio. I understand it could be so tough sometimes to spend a lot of time and a lot of work, a lot of effort on creating certain things that sometimes don't even feel portfolio with. Don't overthink it. The idea I usually give my students, anyone asking on how to approach this type of creative career, is to create some categories in your mind as to the type of pieces that you want to build, the type of portfolio that you want to create, for the type of job that you want to get, or the type of the part of the industry that you want to work in. It's not always about applying for a job, but sometimes it's about having your own portfolio for your website, because you might own a business, you might be interested in starting your own business, or just to do it as a freelancer. So you need to have that particular information. And having a portfolio is super important because it shows that you're not only proficient and capable, but that you have an intimate understanding of your craft in multiple areas or across different areas or across different disciplines within the creative field, within the creative sector. And I would highly advise you to do iterations and use iterations to your advantage. The number of iterations that you have, the larger the number, the greater the success rate, because it means that you would have worked through a greater number of possibilities to arrive at a higher number of outcomes that actually do work and that actually can result in positive outcomes. All right, so you have a system that works. And this system that I'm showing you here, that I'm demonstrating, is just one of many when you are trying to work through ideas at a fairly quick rate. I mean, this piece was done over several hours, but it takes less than half a day to do something like this. It takes less than a day to produce more than one, especially if you have a clear indication as to where you want to go with the concept pieces, with the illustrations, with the designs. So having a plan ultimately is always the best bet for this type of work. If you are just creating for the sake of clearing your head, you just want to build your skills, you want to, do something creative as a side hobby, then you have a little more flexibility in how you might approach it. But ultimately, if you want consistency in your style, if you want consistency in your results, using the methods that I've mentioned in all of the steps so far, I think will help you, and you can develop it on your own and come up with your own slant on these things for the different styles that might exist out there, doing your own thing in your own way. So build a portfolio, demonstrate that you understand your processes methodically. It shows that you have a methodical understanding of what you're doing, that it's not by chance entirely. I mean, some things will come to you as you work, but as long as there is a process that you can demonstrate, you can impart, you can share what you've done, and you could then get feedback from these things, either to improve what you've done or to hear how what you have created or how you've approached something influence someone else to arrive at even greater results. The more I look at this, I can't help but think about my early days as a creative and in this creative field, pursuing, the arts and pursuing animation, illustration, concept art, just designing. I take a great sense of joy in knowing that this was a process. I look back at my journey, I look back at the way I would have approached projects like this in the past and the length of time that it might have taken me. And I have to say, I will admit that while I am much faster, I have a greater sense of clarity in terms of direction and what I want to do with my work. That in the early days, though I didn't know where I wanted to go, I knew what I wanted to do. And that was always to tell stories with my images, with my creations, whether it be moving animations, whether it be animations, 3D, 2D, my illustrations, my motion graphics, my concept work, my storyboards. I just wanted to tell stories. And as long as you make storytelling the center focus of all of your creative works, as long as you understand what your message is, who you hope to send that message to. Your mind will fill the blanks for you. It will fill the rest. It will do the work. All right? You just need to continue to give yourself the opportunity to have exposure to greater pieces of information, to different ways of accomplishing same things. Sometimes learning how to do something that you've known for a long time in a different way changes your perspective on how you can use that thing. All right. So for me, I was always into airbrushing and that soft, blended look. And it took me a while to understand that I needed to get acquainted with my own process in order to have a firm, solid style to begin with. It couldn't just be wishful thinking. I couldn't just say, well, I wanted to have my work look a particular way. I needed to know what that roadmap looked like. How do I get to that style, and how do I do it consistently? All right. I often took it for granted in the past that I would be able to, as an artist, simply produce what is required of me in the way that I know how. But once you start putting practice or pen to paper or stylus to graphic pad, in this instance, you become a little more acquainted. You become a lot more aware of what's needed for your different types of jobs. It helps you to understand, okay, how long something will take you and the value that you would attach to the time that it takes you to do these things. Because when you're running your own business, you're working for yourself, you're a freelancer, you have to understand that, or you should try to understand, you need to keep it in the back of your mind. In order to make this work and function as a business, in order to help your passion help you survive, you need to have a formula, you need to have a structure, you need to have a process that you can rely on consistently, regardless of the type of project, when that project might come, and when it is due. All right, when you have to submit those deliverables. That deadline is really the difference between you and a professional. If you are able to completely undertake your task, to complete your projects and execute your ideas using your processes within a particular deadline, you make yourself not only more marketable, but an asset to anyone that is in the business of ideation, of idea generation. So where you are able to function, once you are able to function within several commercial spaces or within the commercial domain with your particular formula process, you would be able to come up with multiple iterations much faster for over several types of projects. So it's not necessarily confined to illustration or conceptualizing pieces for animation. This applies to film, game design, character design, illustrations for books. It does not matter. As long as you are taking ideas from your mind and applying it to some form of visual media, a process is necessary in order to maintain a quality control. If you want to control the level of quality that you're putting out into the public domain, into commercial spaces with your clients, and even for your portfolios, you need to spend some time figuring out what are your steps to accomplish particular looks in order to fulfill certain tasks, in order to complete certain tasks. You need to know, okay, in order to get light looking a particular way, these are the things I must do. In order to get metals and plastics and glass looking a particular way, this is my technique. And yes, every job or every circumstance will have its own unique requirements. It will have its own vibe, its own energy. However, you need to be able to step into any one of those spaces and bring your style with you, but with a repeatable, consistent process that you can also communicate to your collaborators, clients, and even to those in your virtual domains or virtual spaces. So as we approach the end of this particular session, I just want to recap our journey across the entire video or process, just touching on some of the important things that you need that I'd like you to remember. I'd encourage you to hold on to when you are doing conceptual illustrations, conceptual designs, conceptual art as a whole, environments, characters, creatures, whatever it might be. Keep this in mind. Using a process or having a formula is the formula to success. If you rely on chaos and inspiration in a moment to dictate how you handle and approach or solve certain visual problems or to tell certain stories for visual messaging, then you're literally setting yourself up for failure by avoiding the guarantee of consistency. Because with consistency, it does not necessarily mean that you will succeed consistently. It just means that the consistency will set you up for success. You will have a track record of executing ideas and communicating stories because you would have already established a particular workflow for yourself. In this particular instance, in coming up with 2D conceptual art, working inside of Photoshop, etc., even if you use other 2D software, the principles still apply. These principles are the same. All digital drawing software, all digital sketching software, all layer-based programs will be able to allow you to accomplish this same thing in their own way, but the principles remain the same. Starting with organic lines, using your priming flats, using your flat colors, your shading, your shadows, your highlights, and then integrating further details. Having just that step-by-step process broken down in your mind allows you to tackle things systematically without feeling that burnout. At least you know from a compartmentalized stance what needs to be tackled when and why and how. You're also able, by doing things like that, you're able to go back and make changes, adjust. You're able to test certain results by swapping out the way that you handled or the way that you treated certain properties and certain layers, whether it be the shadows, lights, highlights, the line details, whether it be whatever it might be. Your process allows you to go back under the hood and make adjustments. So there will be other videos where I discuss why a process is important, how I use my processes for different projects, what those processes might look like, the downfalls, the pros and cons, and you will have your own techniques and ways of approaching things. But ultimately, the message here is that you are able to accomplish fully developed scenes and concepts, regardless of what the idea is, as long as you have a formula, as long as you have a process, as long as there's a protocol to how you create. So without further ado, I just want to thank you all for taking the time, for spending this time with us as we explore our techniques in how we produce our illustrated concepts, in our illustrations, our conceptual art. And moving forward, we will be sharing a whole lot more into how we do what we do, why we do it the way we do it, and what our goals are for the future. Thank you guys so much for everything, and I just want to remind you to stay focused, stay consistent, and remember to follow the compass. This is Kyle Stephen for the Digital Academy, signing out. Till next time. Thank you guys.